The Valkyrie dropships descended on Mirth 4 like metal rain falling from an angry Sky. Commander Draxith had received new orders from the Valkyrie High Council, and those orders left no room for interpretation if the humans wanted to play games with words and laws. Then the Valkyrie would change the game entirely. Ground forces would establish a permanent presence on the planet. The Marathons would submit or they would suffer, and the humans could watch helplessly from orbit. Captain Minjin Kao stood on the bridge of the Horizon's Light and watched the invasion begin. "How many troops?" he asked quietly. "Sensors indicate approximately 2,000 Valkyrie soldiers, Captain, and they are establishing positions near the major population centers." And their justification: they claim to have received an invitation from the legitimate government of Mirth 4. The Marathons invited an occupying army. According to the documents the Valkyrie submitted to the assembly, yes, Minjun knew the documents were fabricated. Everyone knew, but proving it would take months of legal proceedings. And by then the Marathons would already be conquered. Made a decision that would change everything. "Prepare a landing team." His first officer turned with wide eyes. "Captain, our orders are to observe only, and we are not authorized for surface operations. Our orders are to provide humanitarian assistance, and the people down there need assistance, and I am going to provide it. Sir, the Valkyrie will not allow it. The Valkyrie can try to stop me. The shuttle that descended to Mirth 4 carried no weapons. It held only Captain Minjin, Dr. Yunji Han, and a small team equipped with medical supplies and recording equipment. Lots of recording equipment. They landed in the capital city just as Valkyrie patrols were establishing checkpoints on every major street. The Marathon civilians watched the humans arrive with a mixture of hope and fear. Dr. Yunji immediately began setting up a field hospital and a community center that had been damaged by Valkyrie landing craft. The wounded came slowly at first, and then in greater numbers. As word spread, Minjin walked through the streets with a camera drone floating beside him. He recorded everything. He recorded the Valkyrie soldiers pushing Marathon elders to the ground. He recorded the checkpoints where families were separated and questioned for hours. He recorded the fear in the eyes of children who did not understand why armored giants had come to their home. And he broadcast it all. Every image and every sound was transmitted to the Horizon's Light in orbit, and from there it spread across the galaxy. Species that had ignored the Marathon crisis for months suddenly found themselves watching it unfold in real time. They saw the peaceful streets turned into occupied zones. They saw the crying children and the desperate parents. They saw everything the Valkyrie had hoped to hide behind closed borders and diplomatic silence. On the third day, the Valkyrie destroyed a school. They claimed it was being used to hide weapons. There were no weapons. There were only children. Dr. Yunji arrived minutes after the attack, and the cameras captured everything. She knelt in the rubble, treating wounded Marathon children, while Valkyrie soldiers stood watching with their weapons ready. The image spread across 1,000 worlds. A human woman caring for alien children in the shadow of their destroyers. It became the symbol of everything wrong with the way the galaxy worked. The Krathani Collective issued their first political statement in 800 years. They formally denounced the Valkyrie occupation as a violation of basic principles of civilization. 3 other major powers followed within hours. Species that had never agreed on anything suddenly agreed on this. What the Valkyrie were doing was wrong, and everyone was watching. Commander Draxith found Minjun in the field hospital on the evening of the 5th day. The human captain was helping distribute food to refugees who had fled their homes. He looked tired and dirty and utterly unafraid. "You have caused a great deal of trouble, human," Draxith said. "I have shown the truth, Commander, and if that causes you trouble, then perhaps the trouble is deserved. We could kill you right now, and no one would be able to prove what happened. You could try, but there are 17 camera drones. recording this conversation, and the whole galaxy would see. And do you really want that? Draxith's claws flexed, but he made no move to attack. Why? He asked, and his voice held genuine confusion. Why would you risk your life for these people? And you did not know they existed a year ago. And they offer you nothing, and they cannot help you, and they are weak and small and unimportant. Minjin looked at the children eating the food he had helped distribute. He looked at the wounded being treated by Dr. Yunjai, looked at the families huddled together, trying to find hope in darkness. Because someone should. He said simply. Draxith stared at him for a long moment. You are insane, and all humans are insane. Maybe we just see things differently, and maybe we remember what it was like to be weak and small and alone, and maybe we decided that we would not let that happen to others if we could help it. Your sentiment will not save them, and the Velthari Empire has resources you cannot imagine. You are right, and we cannot match your ships or your weapons, but we have something you do. Not, and what is that? Minjun gestured at the cameras floating around them. Witnesses, and the whole galaxy is watching Commander, and every action you take is being recorded, and every child you heard is seen by billions, and you can destroy us, but you cannot destroy what we have already shown everyone. Draxith turned and walked away without another word, but Minjun saw something in his eyes that had not been there. Before doubt, the Velthari were winning on the ground, but they were losing everywhere. Else their reputation was crumbling across 100 worlds. There, all eyes were growing silent. Their enemies were growing bold, and all because a handful of humans had refused to look away that night. Minjun received an urgent message the Velthari High Command had ordered Draxith to end the human interference by any means necessary. The commander had been given permission to use lethal force. Minjun shared the message with his team and asked if anyone wanted to evacuate. No one did. They stayed. They kept recording, and they waited to see what the Velthari would do when the whole galaxy was watching. Commander Draxith stood alone in his quarters and stared at the orders displayed on his screen. By any means necessary, he had served the Velthari Empire for 40 years, and he had never questioned the command, but these orders asked him to become something he was not sure he wanted to be. If he killed the humans, the galaxy would never forget. Images would spread and multiply and grow, and every species would see the Velthari as murderers and monsters. Trade agreements would collapse, alliances would shatter. The empire that had taken thousands of years to build would begin to crumble from within, all because of a few humans who refused to stop. Watching, Draxith made a decision that surprised even himself. He requested a private communication channel with Ambassador Yuna Xiong. When her face appeared on his screen, she looked exhausted, but her eyes were sharp and alert. Commander, this is unexpected. I want to talk, Ambassador, and not as enemies, but as two beings who are tired of this game. I am listening. You have won, and you know it, and I know it, and everyone knows it. And the question now is how we end this without destroying everything. Yuna leaned forward. What are you proposing? A meeting, and in person, and somewhere neutral where we can speak without being recorded, and where we can find a way out of this. That does not require more suffering. Why should I trust you? Draxith's scales shifted with something that might have been shame. Because I have spent 5 days watching. Your people care for the wounded, and because I saw your doctor treat Merithan children with the same care she would give her own, and because I am beginning to think that we have been wrong about humans. That is not an answer, Commander. It is the only answer I have, Ambassador, and take it or leave it. Yuna studied him through the screen for a long moment. The horizons, light in neutral space, and just you and me. And if you try anything clever, you should know that half the galaxy will be watching from a distance. I would expect nothing less. The meeting took place 2 days later in the small conference room of the human vessel. Draxith entered alone and unarmed. He sat across from Yuna, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, the commander broke the silence. The blockade was never about territory. No, And it was politics, and there are factions within the Velthri High Council that wanted to demonstrate strength, and they chose the Marathons because they seemed weak and unimportant, and no one would care what happened to them. People always care, Commander, and sometimes they just need someone to show them. Draxith nodded slowly. I am authorized to offer complete withdrawal, and the Marathons will be left in peace. That is a start, but it is not enough. What more do you want? I want you to help us fix this permanently. Draxith's eyes narrowed. Explain. The Codex has been used to justify atrocities for centuries, and we both know it, and the rules that were supposed to bring peace have become tools for the powerful to crush the weak, and I want that to change. You want me to help you rewrite galactic law. I want you to co-sponsor a reform amendment and a humanitarian protection clause that makes what happened to the Marathons impossible in the future. The High Council will never agree. They will if the alternative is galactic isolation, and you know, as well as I do, that the Velthri cannot survive alone, and your economy depends on trade, and your military depends on alliances, and both of those are crumbling because of what you have done here. Draxith sat in silence. The human was right. The Velthri had built their power on relationships that were now poisoned beyond repair. Something had to change, or the Empire would slowly strangle itself. If I agree to this, my own people may see me as a traitor, or they may see you as the leader who saved them from a disaster of their own making. You are asking me to take an enormous risk. Una smiled for the first time. Welcome to being human, Commander, and we take enormous risks every day. And sometimes, that is the only way to build something better. The assembly session 3 weeks later was the most crowded in living memory. Representatives from species that rarely left their homeworlds had traveled across the galaxy to witness what was about to happen. Ambassador Unisiang stood at the central platform with Commander Draxith beside her. Their joint proposal was displayed for all to see: a humanitarian protection clause that would prevent any species from blockading, besieging, or occupying civilian populations. Independent observers authorized to monitor potential violations, automatic sanctions for any species that harm non-combatants in territorial disputes. The debate lasted for hours, but in the end, the vote was overwhelming. The amendment passed. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Codex had been changed. Keeper Varanthi rose from the Urovan section and addressed the assembly. When we wrote the Codex, we believed we were creating something permanent, the ancient voice said. But we were wrong, and laws must grow and change as those who follow them grow and change. And we have waited for someone brave enough to show us this truth. The old eyes turned toward the human delegation. Today we have seen that courage, and we have seen species that were enemies stand together to build something better. And perhaps this is the beginning of what we always hoped the assembly could become. The session ended, and Una walked through the corridors of Concord Station feeling lighter than she had in months. Representatives from a dozen smaller species approached her. They had seen what humanity had done for the Marathons. They wanted to know if humans would help them. Una told them yes. At the docking bay, she found Commander Draxith waiting for Captain Minjin Ko before departing. The two had not spoken since the occupation. Your people are infuriating, Draxith said. I have heard that before. You are dangerous and unpredictable, and you do not know when to quit. Also heard that. And somehow you have made me question everything I believed about the galaxy. Minjin extended his hand in the human gesture of respect. We do not have to be enemies, Commander, and maybe we never did, and maybe this is just the beginning. Draxith looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then, slowly he reached out and took it. You are paying attention now, Minjin said with a smile. That is a start. Draxith released his grip and walked toward his shuttle. But Una saw something in his posture that had not been there before. Hope. Perhaps, or at least the possibility of hope. She turned to Minjin. Do you think we actually changed anything? I think we showed them that change is possible, And sometimes that is all you can do, and sometimes that is enough. They watched the Velthary shuttle depart, and for a moment the galaxy seemed a little less dark. Humanity had not conquered anyone. They had not proven their strength through weapons or war. They had simply refused to look away. They had refused to follow rules that demanded silence in the face of suffering, and somehow that had been enough to shake the foundations of civilizations that had stood for millennia. It would not be easy going forward. There would be more challenges and more enemies, and more moments when the rules said to be quiet and accept injustice, but humanity had learned something important. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply watch, and sometimes watching is just the first step toward making everything better. The Concorde station hung in the darkness between three dying stars, a monument to order that had lasted for 5,000 years. Ambassador Yuna Siong stood at the viewing window of her quarters and watched ships from 100 different worlds drift past like glowing fish in an endless ocean. She had prepared for this moment her entire career, but nothing could have made her ready for the sheer weight of history pressing down on this place. Her aide Taiwan Park entered the room and cleared his throat. "Ambassador, the High Council session begins in 1 hour. "I know," Yuna said without turning around. "You should also know that the Velthary delegation arrived early, and they have been speaking privately with the founding 7 representatives all morning." Yuna finally turned to face him, and she saw the worry in his eyes. The Velthary were a reptilian species known for their military strength and their absolute belief in their own superiority. They had controlled this region of space for centuries, and they did not like sharing power with anyone. "What do you think they are planning?" she asked. Ed Towan shook his head. "Nothing good for the Marathans." The Marathans were the reason for today's session. They were a small, peaceful species who had only recently developed space travel, and their homeworld Mirithfor sat in a system that the Velthary had decided they wanted. For the past 6 months, a Velthary fleet had surrounded the planet and demanded tribute and submission. The Marathans had begged the Galactic Assembly for help, but the Assembly moved slowly, and the Velthary knew exactly how to use the rules to their advantage. Yuna and Taiwan walked through the winding corridors of Concorde Station toward the great chamber. Beings of every shape and size passed them, some walking on 2 legs like humans, others floating or crawling or moving in ways that defied easy description. Humanity had been a probationary member of the Assembly for only 12 standard years. In galactic terms, they were infants, barely. Worth noticing, the great chamber was a vast circular room with seats rising up in tiers around the central platform. Yuna took her place in the human section, a small area near the back where probationary members were assigned. From here, she could see the founding 7 in their elevated positions at the front. These were the species that had written the original Codex of Conduct, the ancient laws that governed all interactions between Assembly members. The Arovan sat at the highest point, their long silver bodies wrapped in robes that shimmered with age. They were the oldest of all the species, and they rarely spoke anymore. Beside them were the crystalline Krathani collective, the hive mind that had remained politically neutral for longer than humanity had existed. The session began with the usual formalities, and then the Marathan representative was allowed to speak. She was small, with large dark eyes that glistened with fear as she addressed the Assembly. "Please," she said, "my people are starving, and the Velthary ships destroy any vessel that tries to bring us food or medicine, and we have done nothing wrong, and we only want to live in peace." The Velthary delegate rose from his seat. Commander Draxith was tall even for his species, with scales the color of dried blood and eyes that held no warmth. "The Marathan representative exaggerates," he said calmly. "We are engaged in bilateral territorial negotiations as permitted under Codex law, and we have made reasonable demands, and the Marathans have refused to cooperate." The Assembly murmured, but no one challenged him. Yuna felt her hands tighten into fists. Under Codex Law 7.3, Draxith continued, No outside power may interfere in bilateral territorial negotiations, and this matter is between the Velthari Empire and the Marathan people alone. The Marathan representative looked around desperately, but the other delegates avoided her eyes. Everyone knew the law, and everyone knew that the Velthari were technically correct. Stood up before she could stop herself. How can you call it negotiation when one side has warships and the other has nothing? She said. Her voice, carrying across the chamber silence, fell like a hammer. Tawan grabbed her arm, but she shook him off. The Marathans are dying. Yuna continued, and we sit here discussing legal technicalities while children starve, and this is not justice, and this is not peace, and this is just cruelty wearing the mask of law. Commander Draxith turned his cold eyes toward her. The human delegate speaks out of turn, he said, and furthermore, the human delegate has no standing to address this body on matters of interstellar law, as humanity remains in probationary status. The assembly speaker, a many-armed being from a species Yuna did not recognize, nodded gravely. Ambassador Siang, you are formally censured for violation of assembly protocol, and you will refrain from further interruptions. Yuna wanted to argue, but Taiwan pulled her back into her seat. Not here, he whispered urgently. Not like this. She sat down, but her blood was boiling around the chamber. She noticed that some delegates were watching her with something other than disapproval. The Krithani representatives had all turned their faceted eyes in her direction, and their antennae were moving in patterns she could not read. And high above in the Orovan section, one of the ancient beings had actually opened its eyes to look at her. The session ended with no action taken. The assembly voted to continue monitoring the situation, which meant doing nothing. The Marathan representative wept quietly as she left the chamber. Yuna returned to her quarters, feeling sick with anger and frustrations. She had accomplished nothing except making enemies and embarrassing herself. Dewan tried to comfort her, but she wanted to be alone. Hours later, when the station had grown quiet, her personal terminal chimed with an incoming message. It was encrypted with a code she did not recognize, and the sender was listed only as Observer. She hesitated for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a file containing detailed reconnaissance data on the Velthari fleet surrounding Mirth 4 ship positions, patrol schedules, weapons capabilities, supply routes, everything an enemy would need to know. And at the bottom of the file was a single question. What will humanity do? Yuna stared at the words until her eyes ached. Someone out there was watching. Someone wanted to know if humans were different from all the other species who had come before. Someone was waiting to see if humanity would follow the rules like everyone else, or if they would actually do something. She thought about the Myrethan representative, and her desperate eyes. She thought about Commander Draxith and his absolute confidence that no one would challenge him. She thought about the Codex and its 5,000 years of order that had somehow become 5,000 years of looking away. While the powerful crushed the weak, Yuna did not know who had sent the message or why, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was going to find out what humanity would do. She suspected the answer would make a lot of very powerful beings very uncomfortable. She closed the file and began composing a message to Admiral Junho Beak at Earth's United Stellar Command. The rules said she should do nothing. The rules said the Marethans were not her problem, but Yuna had never been very good at following rules that asked her to ignore suffering. Tomorrow, she would begin the journey home, and then humanity would give the galaxy its answer. Commander Draxith stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the tiny human vessel that had refused to move for 11 days. It floated there like an insult, broadcasting its peaceful intentions to anyone who would listen. He could destroy it with a single command, but he knew that was exactly what the humans wanted. Commander, his second officer said, we have received new orders from High Command. And what does High Command suggest we do about the human problem? They have authorized economic interdiction, and if we cannot remove the human ship directly, then we will prevent any supplies from reaching it or the planet below. Draxith nodded slowly. This was good. The Codex had clear provisions for controlling trade routes in disputed territories, and the humans could not complain about rules that applied equally to everyone. Block all supply lanes, and nothing enters this system without Velthary inspection and approval. Within hours, the blockade tightened. 3. Human cargo ships carrying additional supplies were turned away at the system boundary. The horizons. Light was now isolated with only the resources it had brought on board the human vessel. Captain Minjun Ko received the news with a grim expression. "How long can we maintain our mission?" he asked his supply officer. 2 weeks at current consumption rates, Captain, and after that we will have nothing left to give the Marathons, and barely enough to keep ourselves alive. Minjun sent an encrypted message to Earth and waited. The response came from Ambassador Yuna Xiong within 6 hours. "The Volthari think they know the Codex," Yuna said through the secure channel. "But they have only read the parts that benefit them, and Lieutenant Chai has found us another path. I am listening." Article 12.7 allows for free movement of goods between cultural exchange partners, and there are no restrictions on who can form such partnerships. You want the Marathons to become our cultural exchange partners. I want you to ask them, and if they agree, then Velthari trade restrictions no longer apply to goods moving between Earth and Mirith 4. Minjun could not help but laugh. Ambassador, that is either brilliant or insane. In my experience, those are often the same thing. The Marathon government agreed within hours. They would have agreed to almost anything that might save their people. The partnership documents were transmitted to the Galactic Assembly and registered officially before the Velthari even understood what was happening. When Commander Draxith learned that human supply ships were once again approaching his blockade carrying partnership credentials that gave them legal right of passage, his roar of fury could be heard throughout his ship. "This is mockery," he shouted at the assembly session that had been called to address his complaint. "The humans are making a joke of our laws." Ambassador Yuna Xiong stood in the human section, and this time she had been given official permission to speak. "The humans are following the law, Commander, and that is what you wanted, is it not? You twist the words to mean what they were never intended to mean. The words say what they say, and it is not our fault that the Codex has gaps large enough to fly a humanitarian mission through." Laughter rippled through parts of the chamber, and Drax's scales flushed dark with humiliation. The Velthari demand that the Assembly declare the human partnership invalid. "On what grounds?" Yuna asked calmly. "On the grounds that it was formed in bad faith solely to circumvent legitimate territorial claims." Can the commander prove bad faith? And can he demonstrate that our partnership with the Marathons serves no genuine cultural or humanitarian purpose? Draxith had no response because the partnership was already facilitating real exchanges. Human doctors were treating Marathon patients. Human teachers were sharing knowledge. Human and Marathon scientists were working together. The partnership was real and growing stronger every day. The assembly speaker called for a vote on the Volthar motion. It failed for the first time in centuries. A major power had been outmaneuvered by a probationary species using nothing but words and legal creativity. After the session, Yuna was approached by Keeper Varanthi of the Auravanthe. Ancient being moved slowly with robes that seemed to flow like liquid silver and eyes that held the weight of millennia. "Ambassador Xiong," Varanthi said in a voice like wind through dry leaves, "you have done something that has not been done in 3,000 years. I have made enemies. You have made the Assembly pay attention." Yuna waited as the old being studied her with an expression she could not read. "I was there when the Codex was written," Varanthi continued, "and I remember the arguments and the compromises and the hope that we were building something that would bring peace to the galaxy. With respect, Keeper, the Codex has brought order, but I am not sure it has brought peace. No. And that is the tragedy that my generation must bear, and we created rules to prevent war, and instead We created rules that powerful species used to wage war without ever firing a weapon. Then why has no one changed them? Varanthi made a sound that might have been a sigh. Because change is frightening, and because those who benefit from the current system have no desire to see it altered, and because no one has been brave enough or foolish enough to demonstrate the flaws so publicly. Until now, yes, and I have watched many species join the assembly over the long years, and most learn to play the game as it has always been played, and humans are different. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Varanthi's ancient eyes seemed to look through Yuna to something far beyond. I do not know yet, and much depends on what happens next, and the Velthri will not accept this humiliation quietly, and they will escalate. What do you suggest we do? What you have been doing, Ambassador? And keep watching, and keep recording, and let the galaxy see the truth, and that is more powerful than any fleet. Varanthi turned to leave, but paused. The Codex was never meant to be eternal, and we always hoped someone would have the courage to fix what we began, and perhaps that someone has finally arrived. The ancient Arovan drifted away, leaving Yuna standing alone in the empty corridor. She thought about what lay ahead. The Velthri would indeed escalate. They would push until something broke, but humanity would be ready. They would keep following the rules, and they would keep finding the places where the rules did not say what the powerful wanted them to say. It was not the way things had been done for 5,000 years, but maybe it was time for a new way. The Defense Council chamber deep beneath Seoul was filled with tension when Yuna finished her report. Admiral John Ho Beek sat at the head of the long table with his fingers pressed together, and his expression unreadable. Around him sat the most powerful military and diplomatic minds humanity had to offer, and none of them looked happy. Let me understand this correctly. The Admiral said slowly. You want us to directly challenge the Velthri Empire and risk expulsion from the Galactic Assembly and potentially invite military action against Earth itself. I want us to help people who are dying, Yuna replied. Those are not the same thing. A general near the end of the table shook his head. The Codex is clear, and if we interfere, we lose everything we have worked for. And 12 years of building relationships and trade agreements and technology exchanges all gone. And if we do nothing? Yuna asked. What does that say about who we are? Silence hung in the room. Admiral Beek finally spoke again. I am not unsympathetic, Ambassador, and I have read the intelligence you received, and I find myself wondering why someone would send it to you. Does that matter? It might and it might not, but what matters more is whether there is any way to help the Marathans without destroying ourselves in the process. A young voice spoke up from the far end of the table. There might be, sir. Everyone turned to look at Lieutenant Soin Chash. He was barely 30 years old and had been invited to the meeting only because of her expertise in interstellar law. Looked nervous under all those eyes, but she did not back down. I have been studying the Codex since Ambassador Seong sent her preliminary report, Soin said, and Codex Law 7.3 specifically forbids military intervention and bilateral territorial negotiations. We know this, Lieutenant, the general said impatiently. Yes, sir, but the law says military intervention, and it says nothing about civilian humanitarian missions. The room went quiet again, but this time the silence had a different quality. Admiral Beek leaned forward. Explain. The Codex was written 5,000 years ago by species that thought in terms of warships and conquest. Soin continued, and they never imagined that someone might send unarmed vessels carrying only doctors and food and medicine. And if we dispatch a humanitarian mission, then technically we are not violating the law. The Velthri will not see it that way. Yuna said, No, they will not, but that is exactly the point. And if they attack an unarmed humanitarian vessel, then they become the aggressors, and they violate the Codex, and the entire galaxy will see them for what they really are. Admiral Beek sat back in his chair, and a small smile crossed his face. "Lieutenant Chai, I think you may have just earned yourself a promotion." 2 weeks later, the research vessel Horizons Light departed from Earth's orbital station. Captain Minjun Ko stood on the bridge and watched the stars stretch into lines as the ship entered. Faster than light travel, his crew was small. Only 40 people, and his ship carried no weapons of any kind. They had medical supplies and food and water purification equipment, and that was all. It was either the bravest or the most foolish mission in human history, and Minjun was not entirely sure which. Captain, his communications officer, said, "We have received confirmation from command, and the diplomatic channel to the Galactic Assembly is open." "Good, and make sure every species with a receiver can hear what we broadcast." "Sir, we are going to be very loud about what we are doing, Lieutenant, and I want the whole galaxy watching." The journey to Marithan space took 6 days when the Horizons Light dropped out of faster than light travel. The Valkyrie fleet was waiting. Minjun counted 18 warships arranged in a perfect blockade formation around the small blue-green world below. Each of those ships could destroy his vessel in seconds, and they all knew it. "Incoming transmission, Captain." The communications officer reported. Commander Draxith's face appeared on the main screen, and his reptilian features were twisted with barely contained anger. "Human vessel, you have entered restricted space, and you will reverse course immediately, or face the consequences." Minjun stood calmly with his hands clasped behind his back. "Commander Draxith, this is Captain Minjun Ko of the humanitarian research vessel Horizons Light, and we are here on a mission of mercy to provide medical assistance and food supplies to the people of Mirith 4. And we carry no weapons, and we pose no threat to your fleet. You pose a threat simply by being here. And this is a Valkyrie matter, and you have no right to interfere. We are not interfering in your negotiations, Commander, and we are simply providing humanitarian aid to civilians in need, and the Codex does not forbid this." Draxith's eyes narrowed. "Do not play word games with me, human. I am not playing games, and I am trying to prevent innocent people from dying. And if you have objections, I suggest you take them up with the Galactic Assembly." Minjun gestured, and his communications officer began broadcasting on every open channel. "This is the Earth vessel Horizons Light, calling all Galactic Assembly members, and we are currently positioned in Marithan space on a humanitarian mission, and we are unarmed, and we are here only to help, and we ask that all observers note our presence and our intentions." The message repeated in a dozen languages and spread across the region at the speed of light. Every ship within range would hear it. Every species would know what was happening. "Commander." Draxith's scales had darkened with fury. "You think you are clever, human, but you are making a terrible mistake. And the Valkyrie do not forget insults. We are not trying to insult you, Commander, and we are trying to save lives, and if that insults you, then perhaps you should examine why." The transmission ended abruptly. Minjun let out a long breath. "Well, that could have gone worse. Sir, the Valkyrie ships are not moving." "Of course they are not, and they cannot fire on us without proving to the galaxy that they are exactly what we say they are, and for now we wait." The Horizons Light held its position between the Valkyrie fleet and Mirith. 4 hours passed, and then days. Valkyrie ships watched, but they did not attack, and across the galaxy something unexpected began to happen. The Krathani Collective, neutral for 3,000 years, announced that they were sending an observer ship to monitor the situation. Other species began asking questions in the assembly. News of the human vessel and its tiny brave crew spread from system to system for the first time in longer than anyone could remember. The Valkyrie were not in control of the story. They were being watched, and they did not like it at all. On the bridge of the Horizons Light, Captain Minjun Ko looked at the massive warships surrounding him and smiled. They had bigger guns and more power and thousands of years of experience, but humanity had something the Valkyrie had never expected: courage to stand still and let the whole galaxy see the truth. and sometimes that was more dangerous than any weapon.